5 years ago, I discovered something terrifying. Someone had been living my life, using my name, my credit, my social security number, my identity. At first, I thought it was a hacker. Then, I thought it was organized fraud. But when the truth finally came out, I realized the person who had stolen my identity wasn't a stranger. It was my sister. And by the time I proved it, she had already destroyed my finances, ruined my reputation, and almost sent me to prison. So I did the only thing left. I made sure that, legally speaking, my sister no longer existed. My sister Rachel and I were only 2 years apart, but growing up, it felt like we lived in completely different worlds. Rachel was charming, confident, the kind of person who always knew how to talk her way out of trouble. Teachers liked her, neighbors liked her. Even when Rachel made mistakes, people assumed there was some kind of misunderstanding. Meanwhile, I was the responsible one, quiet, organized, predictable, which meant something strange happened in our family dynamic. Rachel created problems. I solved them. Rachel forgot things. I remembered them. Rachel took risks. I cleaned up the consequences. For years, I thought that dynamic was normal, until one day I realized something horrifying. Rachel hadn't just relied on me growing up. She had learned how to be me. The first strange thing happened shortly after I moved to another city for work. I received a call from my bank. They asked about a credit card application. The problem was simple. I hadn't applied for one. At first, I assumed it was identity theft. So I canceled the application and moved on. Fraud happens. Banks handle it. Life continues. But then it happened again. And again. 3 different credit applications in 2 months, each one using my information, my social security number, my date of birth, even my old home address. Eventually, the situation became serious. Collection agencies started calling, creditors started sending letters. According to their records, I had multiple unpaid credit cards, loans, even a car lease, none of which I had ever opened. At first, I believed it was a large-scale identity theft operation, some hacker who had stolen my information online. But when I began investigating, something didn't make sense. The applications used information that wasn't publicly available, details only family members knew. That's when I realized something terrifying. Whoever stole my identity knew me personally, and the list of people with that much information about my life was very small. I froze my credit immediately, filed identity theft reports, contacted every bank involved. The process took months, but something strange kept happening. New accounts continued appearing, even after the credit freeze, which meant one thing. The person using my identity already had access to accounts created years earlier, accounts that had been opened long before I noticed anything was wrong, which meant the identity theft wasn't recent. It had been happening for years. One evening, I called my parents, mostly out of frustration. I told them what was happening. My mother sounded shocked. My father sounded confused. But Rachel sounded quiet, too quiet. At the time, I didn't think much of it, but later I would remember that silence perfectly. Because sometimes the biggest clues don't come from what someone says, they come from what they don't. 6 months later, the full damage became clear. My credit score had collapsed. Multiple loans had gone into default. One lender even filed legal action, which meant something terrifying. According to official records, I owed nearly $90,000, money I had never borrowed. But the worst part wasn't the debt. The worst part came when I discovered where the money had gone. Because the person using my identity wasn't hiding. They were living a life I recognized, a life that looked suspiciously familiar. The first time I saw the spending patterns, I actually thought there had been some mistake. Not because the charges were unfamiliar, because they were too specific, too personal, too close to a life I recognized. A boutique hotel in Scottsdale, a furniture store in my hometown. A gym membership opened under my name less than 15 minutes from the neighborhood where my parents still lived. Then there was the car lease, a white SUV, registered in a neighboring county. The monthly payments had been defaulting under my social security number for almost a year. I sat at my kitchen table surrounded by printed statements, collection letters, fraud reports, and highlighters that had stopped meaning anything 2 hours earlier, and felt the room tilt. This wasn't random identity theft. Random thieves don't shop in your hometown. They don't open gym memberships near your childhood house. They don't furnish apartments with stores your sister once dragged you into because she liked the lighting for social media photos. That was the first time the thought entered my head clearly enough to scare me. Rachel. I didn't say it out loud, not even to myself. Because once you say something like that, the world changes shape, and I wasn't ready for that yet. 2 weeks later, I drove home, not because I had proof, because I needed to see. My parents thought I was visiting because it had been too long. I let them believe that. The truth was uglier. I was there to watch my own family like a stranger watching suspects. Rachel was living in a condo on the west side of town, a place I knew she couldn't afford. Not on the salary from the boutique marketing firm she always talked about. Not with her erratic work history. Not with the way she spent money like consequences were for other people. Still, when I pulled into the lot that evening and saw the white SUV parked outside, I felt the air leave my body. The plate number matched the records. It was there. My car stayed idling at the curb while I stared at the windshield and told myself not to panic. There are moments when the truth stands so close to you that your body understands it before your mind does. My hands had already gone cold. Then Rachel came out of the building, laughing, phone in hand, designer sunglasses on her head despite the setting sun. A shopping bag from the exact furniture store listed on one of the fraudulent accounts swinging from her wrist. And for one insane second, the entire world went silent. Because my sister didn't look like someone living recklessly. She looked comfortable, practiced, at home inside a life built with my name. That was the moment I stopped wondering whether Rachel was involved. The only question left was how long she had been doing it. And the answer, when I finally got it, was worse than anything I had imagined. It wasn't months. It wasn't one desperate year. My sister had been using my identity for 5 years. I didn't confront her immediately. That would have been emotional. And emotional people make mistakes. Instead, I started documenting everything. I photographed the car, the license plate, the building, the shipping labels visible through her passenger side window. I wrote down the time she entered and exited. Then I drove to my parents' house and sat through dinner pretending I was there for lasagna and family updates. Rachel arrived halfway through, 20 minutes late and full of herself. She kissed my mother's cheek, made some joke about traffic, and slipped into her chair like she had nothing to hide. My father asked about work. Rachel answered smoothly. Busy, she said. A couple of high-value clients are draining me, but in a good way. My mother smiled proudly. She's doing so well. I watched Rachel twist pasta around her fork and felt something in me harden. Because now I knew what no one else at that table knew. My sister's high-value clients had my social security number. Her success story had my credit score. Her life had my paperwork underneath it. Then my mother said something I would later replay with almost forensic attention. She's always been resourceful. Rachel smirked. Had to be. Resourceful. That was one word for it. Criminal also came to mind. But I stayed quiet, because I still didn't know the full architecture of what she had done. I only knew enough to understand that if I accused her too early and my parents warned her, she would burn every bridge of proof before I ever reached it. And if there was one thing Rachel knew how to do, it was survive by destroying evidence and letting other people absorb the smoke. Back in my city, I stopped trying to handle it alone. Banks were useless in the way large institutions often are when fraud becomes inconveniently complex. Some accounts were willing to investigate. Others acted like because the damage was old, it belonged to me now. One representative actually told me, unfortunately, if someone close to you had access to your information, that can become more of a civil matter. A civil matter, like my life had been vandalized with a polite pen. So I hired an attorney. Her name was Elena Ward. Sharp suit, clipped sentences, zero patience for vagueness. She specialized in identity theft, consumer fraud, and financial damage recovery. The kind of lawyer people like Rachel never think about until it's too late. Elena reviewed the stack of documents for 20 minutes in complete silence. Then she looked up and said, "This is someone close to you." I felt my stomach dip. "I think it's my sister." Elena didn't react with surprise, just nodded once, like she had already reached the same conclusion. "Good," she said. I blinked. "Good?" "It's harder emotionally," she replied, "but easier strategically. Strangers make random mistakes. Family makes patterned ones." She tapped a loan statement. She used known addresses, personal overlap, familiar merchants, locality drift. This is not professional theft. This is entitlement. The word hit me hard because it was exactly right. Rachel hadn't built a careful criminal enterprise. She had simply reached into my life the way she had reached into everything my entire childhood. Casually, confident I would adjust. Elena looked at me steadily. "If it is your sister," she said, "then you do not confront her yet." I nodded. "Why?" "Because people like this don't panic cleanly," she said. "They start rewriting, deleting, performing. They will cry before they confess, accuse before they explain. And if your parents are the type I think they are, they will try to make peace before they allow accountability." She was right. Even without meeting my family, she was right. "So what do I do?" I asked. Elena folded her hands. "We build a timeline," she said, "and then we make sure the law sees exactly who she is before the family gets a chance to tell a nicer story." Over the next month, Elena and I built the case, not just with the fraudulent accounts, but with everything around them. Addresses used, phones connected, IP records from online applications, delivery logs, prior disputes, public records, subscription services. The sheer volume of it made me physically sick. This wasn't a small burst of bad judgment. It was a sustained alternate life. Rachel had used my name to open store credit accounts, utilities, a personal loan, 2 credit cards, the car lease, and even a short-term business line of credit. That last one made Elena sit back in her chair and whistle softly through her teeth. "Your sister is ambitious," she said. "She's a parasite." Elena almost smiled. "Those aren't mutually exclusive." Then we found the oldest account. 5 years earlier. A low-limit credit card opened while I was still living across the country for work. At the time, I had been too busy and too financially stable to notice one extra inquiry buried in my report. By the time late payments hit, Rachel had already rolled the activity into newer lines and moved on. 5 years. 5 years of me unknowingly paying emotional interest on damage I hadn't caused. 5 years of Rachel building credit history under my name while telling everyone her life was finally coming together. Elena looked at the date and said quietly, "She learned early that no one was watching closely." That sentence hurt in ways the financial loss hadn't yet. Because it was true. Rachel had stolen my identity the same way she stole everything else, by correctly assessing what people expected from each of us. She knew I was the sister people assumed would recover. She knew she was the sister people assumed had complicated reasons. She didn't just count on systems, she counted on family mythology. And family mythology is one of the most durable forms of fraud there is. There was another casualty I haven't mentioned yet. Evan. We had been together 8 months when the collections escalated. Not the love of my life, not even close, but good, decent. A person who had entered my life during a season when I was beginning to trust my future again. The first time he saw one of the legal notices on my kitchen counter, he asked gently, "What's going on?" I told him the cleaned up version. Identity theft? Fraud. I'm handling it. At first, he was supportive. Then more letters came. Then a creditor filed notice. Then my bank account got temporarily restricted pending document review. Then one Saturday morning, we were supposed to go to brunch, and I spent 2 hours crying in my car outside a branch office because an employee with perfect lipstick kept saying, "We just need to verify you are who you claim to be. You are who you claim to be." I remember that sentence more vividly than some funerals I've attended. It sounds administrative until it lands on the wrong day. Evan lasted another month. Then he left in the most honest way possible. "I don't think you're lying," he said, "but your life feels like it's collapsing, and I don't know how to stand inside that with you." I hated him for 3 days. Then I understood. Identity theft doesn't just take money, it makes you unstable in the eyes of people who prefer clean realities. And Rachel had built me into a person whose paperwork argued with her existence. That is an exhausting woman to love. I thought the debt was the worst part. Then the state sent me a notice tied to a business filing I had never made. And suddenly, this wasn't just about ruined credit anymore. My sister hadn't only used my name to live better. She had used it in a way that could make the government believe I was committing fraud. And if I handled the next step wrong, I could actually be charged. The notice arrived on a Tuesday in a window envelope that looked offensively ordinary for something capable of ruining you. I almost threw it on the pile with the others. Then I saw the heading: Failure to comply. Tax registration review. I opened it standing in my kitchen. By the time I reached the second paragraph, I had to sit down. According to the state, a small design consulting business had been registered under my name and tax ID 3 years earlier. It had incomplete filings, delinquent reporting, and possible underreported income. I had never opened a business. Not then, not ever. The notice invited me to respond within 14 days. Invited. A charming little bureaucratic word for prove. You aren't this criminal on schedule or we escalate. I sent it to Elena immediately. She called me within 10 minutes. "Do not contact the state yourself yet," she said. "Why?" "Because right now," she replied, "your sister has made you look like a sloppy fraudster. We need to stop you from sounding like one." That's when I learned another ugly truth. When someone steals your identity well, every attempt you make to defend yourself can sound like improvisation unless you have structure. Elena didn't just file a dispute. She built a wall. Affidavits, A fraud packet. Location records from my employment history proving I lived elsewhere during key filings. Payroll evidence, residential leases, even archived utility bills. By the end of the week, my whole life had become an evidence binder, and every document said the same thing in a different language. I was real. She wasn't. At least, not legally. Not where it mattered most. That thought would matter later. Much later. When I finally understood how to destroy someone without touching them. 2 days after Elena sent the preliminary fraud package, my mother called. Which told me something instantly. Rachel was feeling pressure. My mother never phoned from nowhere unless someone else in the family was trying to manage a problem through her. Her voice was too bright. "Hi, sweetheart." I leaned back in my desk chair. "Hi." A pause. Then, too casually, "Have you talked to Rachel recently?" There it was. "No." Another pause. "She says you've been acting distant." I almost laughed. I had been acting distant for years because my sister had been wearing my life like a coat. But sure. Distant. "I'm busy," I said. My mother exhaled softly. "She feels like you're upset with her." There was a strange comfort in how predictable this was. Even now, before she knew exactly what I knew, my mother's instinct was to emotionally pre-negotiate the terrain, to soften me before the facts arrived. "I am upset with her," I said. Silence. Then, "Why?" I looked out the office window at the city below me and thought about all the ways I could answer that. Because she stole from me. Because she built debt in my name. Because she has been living a cleaner, easier version of adulthood on top of the wreckage of mine. Instead, I said, "You should ask Rachel." My mother's tone changed. Just slightly. "Is there something I need to know?" "Yes," I said. "But not from me." Then I ended the call. I knew what would happen next. My mother would call Rachel. Rachel would deny. Then Rachel would panic. And panicked people do one of two things. They disappear. Or they reach for control. Rachel had never been a disappearing type. That night, Rachel did exactly what Elena predicted. She didn't deny it. She didn't apologize. She showed up at my apartment. And what she said through my front door proved something chilling. My sister wasn't scared because she'd been caught. She was scared because she thought I might finally stop protecting the version of her the family still believed in. Rachel didn't text first. She didn't call. She showed up. It was just after 11 when someone started knocking on my apartment door. Not politely, not softly. Sharp, impatient knocks that echoed down the hallway. I knew it was her before I even checked. Rachel had always knocked like the world belonged to her. I opened the door halfway. She stood there. The same white SUV I had photographed weeks earlier parked behind her. Designer jacket, perfect hair. But her eyes looked different. Not scared. Alert. Like someone who had just realized the rules of the game had changed. Rachel didn't apologize. That was the first thing I noticed. Instead, she said something completely different. "You're making a mistake." Not "I made a mistake." "You're making one." That sentence told me everything about how she saw the situation. "You stole my identity," I said. Rachel sighed like I had just accused her of something inconvenient. "You're overreacting." The calmness in her voice made my hands shake, because people who panic sometimes tell the truth. But people who stay calm have already decided what story they're going to tell. She stepped inside my apartment without waiting for permission. Rachel always had that habit growing up, walking into spaces like they belonged to her. "This situation got out of control," she said. I crossed my arms. "You opened credit cards in my name." Rachel waved her hand dismissively. It wasn't supposed to hurt you. The words hung in the air for several seconds. That sentence was almost worse than an apology, because it meant she had known exactly what she was doing. She just believed I could absorb the consequences. Rachel sat on the couch like she had every right to be there. You had perfect credit, she said. You weren't using it. I stared at her. You stole $90,000 from me. Rachel rolled her eyes. You weren't actually using that money. The logic was unbelievable, but at the same time, completely predictable. Rachel had spent her entire life assuming my stability existed for her benefit. Then Rachel said something that made my stomach drop. You think I did this alone? For a moment, I couldn't breathe, because suddenly I realized something terrifying. If Rachel had help, this situation was even bigger than I thought. Rachel leaned forward slightly. You know how banks work, she said. Applications, verification, address checks. I nodded slowly. So? Rachel smiled faintly. I had help making sure everything went through. My mind started racing, because identity theft at that level required more than just personal information. Someone inside the system had helped her. Someone who knew how to bypass the red flags. Who? I asked quietly. Rachel didn't answer. She just stood up. You should drop this. For the first time since she arrived, Rachel's voice lost its casual tone. If you push this investigation further, she said, things could get messy. Messy for who? For everyone. That was when I understood something important. Rachel wasn't confident. She was desperate. And desperate people often reveal more than they realize. What Rachel didn't know was that Elena had warned me something like this might happen. People like your sister don't confess formally, she told me earlier that week. They confess emotionally. So when Rachel started knocking on my door that night, I had already started recording. Every word, every admission, every threat. Rachel walked toward the door, then paused. You've always been the responsible one, she said quietly. You'll fix this. That sentence made something inside me snap, because suddenly I realized something. Rachel had never expected consequences. Not once in her life. She believed I would clean up the mess the same way I always had growing up. But this time was different. The next morning, I played the recording for Elena. She listened without interrupting. When it ended, she leaned back in her chair. Well, she said calmly, that's extremely useful. I blinked. That's it? Elena smiled slightly. Your sister just confirmed intent, knowledge, and participation in identity fraud. She tapped the desk. And she admitted someone helped her. That second detail changed everything, because if someone inside a financial institution helped Rachel, this case wasn't just identity theft anymore. It was conspiracy. And that meant the consequences could be far worse than Rachel ever imagined. Over the next few weeks, Elena and her team began digging deeper. Bank employees, application approval patterns, IP addresses tied to certain submissions. Eventually, a name appeared. Someone who worked in loan verification. Someone who had quietly approved several of the suspicious applications. And when Elena showed me the file, I felt my stomach twist again, because I recognized the name. He wasn't just a banker. He was Rachel's boyfriend. Rachel hadn't just stolen my identity. She had built an entire system around it. A boyfriend inside the bank. Access to my personal information. Years of unchecked spending. The more we uncovered, the clearer the picture became. Rachel hadn't made one desperate mistake. She had built a lifestyle, using my life as the foundation. But the most shocking discovery came next. Because the fraud Rachel committed didn't just destroy my finances, it created a legal loophole that would allow Elena to do something almost unbelievable. Something that would erase Rachel from the system entirely. Legally speaking, my sister would no longer exist. The name Elena showed me belonged to Mark Dalton, loan verification specialist at one of the banks connected to the fraudulent accounts. When I saw the photo attached to the file, I recognized him immediately. Rachel had brought him to a family barbecue 2 summers earlier. I remembered almost nothing about the conversation we had that day. Just that he was quiet, observant. The kind of person who didn't speak much but watched everything. Back then, I assumed he was shy. Now I realized he had probably been studying me, memorizing details, the information Rachel would later need. Over the next several weeks, Elena's investigation uncovered something disturbing. Rachel hadn't been improvising. She and Mark had built a system. Rachel provided the personal information. Mark quietly pushed the applications through verification. Addresses were adjusted, flags were cleared, documentation was approved. Every step looked legitimate from the outside, which is why the fraud lasted 5 years. When Elena finally added everything together, the numbers shocked even her. Total fraudulent activity tied to my identity: $137,000, credit cards, personal loans, vehicle lease, business credit line, utility accounts, even a medical bill opened under my insurance. Rachel had used my identity like a backup bank account for half a decade. And because my credit had originally been excellent, lenders trusted the applications immediately. By the time the damage surfaced, Rachel had already moved on to new accounts. Eventually, there was no way to keep the situation quiet anymore. Elena insisted we tell my parents before the legal filings began. I drove to their house on a Sunday afternoon. My mother opened the door with the same smile she always used, the one that assumed family visits were pleasant. That smile disappeared within 10 minutes. My father read through the documents slowly. Rachel's name, the accounts, the amounts. At first he looked confused, then angry, then something worse. Disbelief. "This has to be a mistake," my mother whispered. "It isn't," I said. Rachel arrived 20 minutes later. Apparently, my mother had already called her. She walked into the living room with the same confident posture she always used, until she saw the paperwork on the table. For the first time since this entire nightmare began, my sister actually looked afraid. "Rachel," my father said quietly, "tell me this isn't true." Rachel's eyes moved between us, between the documents, between the lawyer sitting beside me. And then she did something predictable. She lied. But Rachel made one mistake. One small mistake that changed everything. Because instead of denying everything, she blamed someone else. "This isn't all my fault," she said. My father frowned. "What does that mean?" Rachel hesitated, then pointed toward me. She agreed to help me. For a moment, the room went completely silent. Even Elena raised an eyebrow. Rachel continued quickly. "She said I could use her credit temporarily." The lie was ridiculous. But Rachel wasn't trying to convince me. She was trying to convince our parents. Because Rachel understood something very well. Our parents wanted to believe her. That was when I played the recording. The one from the night Rachel came to my apartment. Her voice filled the living room speakers. Clear, undeniable. Every sentence she had spoken. Every admission. Every threat. By the time the recording ended, my mother was crying. My father looked 10 years older. Rachel said nothing, because for the first time in her life, there was no way to twist the story. Within a week, Elena filed the official fraud report: identity theft, financial fraud, conspiracy. The bank also opened an internal investigation into Mark Dalton. Once the legal process started, everything moved quickly. Rachel's accounts were frozen, the car lease was repossessed. Her credit lines disappeared overnight. But the real shock came when Elena explained the final step of the strategy. Rachel had created multiple accounts using my identity. In several systems, my name and personal identifiers now existed in two conflicting legal profiles, one connected to me, one connected to Rachel's fraudulent activity. To resolve the conflict, the court would require a formal determination of identity, which meant something unusual. Rachel would have to legally surrender the identity she had been using. My identity. In other words, the version of Rachel that existed under my name would officially be declared invalid. Legally speaking, that person would cease to exist. When Elena explained the process, she smiled slightly. "Your sister built her life using your identity," she said, "and now the court is going to erase that life completely." 3 months later, we stood in a courtroom. Rachel sat on the opposite side of the room. Her lawyer looked exhausted because the evidence was overwhelming: financial records, bank testimony, application logs, and the recording. When the judge finished reviewing everything, he spoke calmly. "The identity associated with these accounts belongs to the plaintiff." Then he looked directly at Rachel. "The alternate identity created under these credentials is legally invalid." That meant something simple. The life Rachel had built under my identity no longer existed. Rachel eventually faced criminal charges. Mark lost his job and his professional license. The fraudulent accounts were cleared from my credit history. It took time to rebuild everything, but eventually my life returned to normal. Or at least a version of normal.